Okay, I'm going to give it one more, do one more check of the folks on the call, and I guess we will just go ahead then and get started.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the purpose of today's discussion is to continue on with the discussion that we started last time about capturing, going into more details of change and what that really looks like. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. And the last time we got through 6 different scenarios. So I will just summarize. We document the what the scenario is all about. The work package feature is not open, work is not started, and then we're showing the before and after, and then talking about the change action from an Agile perspective, an EVM perspective, and the impact. And these scenarios, the first few, were right from the Agile guide that IPMD, the Agile Committee, produces. And we are now to the point where we're moving beyond the guide itself and coming up with additional change scenarios. So the homework assignment from the folks on the call last time was to think about other change scenarios that we would like to talk about. And our backdrop is, we're in the 5th release. We have, 8 releases that we're tracking. We have these sprints. And so, the next piece of this is, what scenario do we want to talk about this time? So does anybody have any suggestions for the type of change that you are seeing, or a type of change that we want to capture? And I'm going to go ahead and open our guide and see if we can get the discussion. Oftentimes once we start talking, it jogs people's memory for the type of change that they are seeing. So I'm going to the guide scenarios. So we've already covered scenario 1 and scenario 3. So let's go ahead and then dive into scenario 2. So the work package feature is 30% complete. So what that would look like, this is actually scenario 2 from the guide. So what that would look like, and we have some basic assumptions with regard to a feature. So here's our feature X. time now is partway through. Actually, we're going to go ahead and move time now out to here. So time now is at the end of the feature. We make an assumption feature X was scheduled to complete by sprint 15 and did not. So here's the before. So the question becomes, what baseline change management is implemented? So we were supposed to be 100% complete here, but we were not. And the customer accepts the delivery on this date without 100% of the functionality. So what do? Do we deem that work package as closed?
Andrea, this is David Hewlett. I'm sort of outside of this community a little bit, but I've looked at a couple of these things, and it just seems to me that when you accept something that is not complete, then that eliminates all discipline. I mean, they say, oh well, when do you want it? I've got to drop around that time, and I'll give you what I've got, and it'll work pretty good, and then we can upload it later. And that's I mean, I don't know how you can run a program that way, but you know, as I say, I'm not in this community, but isn't that a problem, to accepting something that is not complete and then saying yes, but I'll complete it when? Pretty soon all the incomplete features pile up at the end, and realize you've accepted everything up to that point, and you still have a half finished product, and that's no discipline at all.
And I think it really depends. You know, we found last time in our discussion, you know, you must always impact the root cause of the changes. And, you know, as we're talking here, I want to go back to the scenario. So, and I think we could split this scenario into multiple things. So note the words, the customer accepts the delivery without the feature functionality. I'm going to go ahead and update this. And, you know, let's say that feature X, Y, and Z they are part of the delivery. Okay, so let's say we actually break this down a little bit further. Whoops. And say that this is the delivery date.
Okay.
And, you know, let's say we have first one's 100% complete. The second one is 100% complete, and the last one is 30% complete.
Andrew,
sure, but the last one might be the most difficult delivery of all. Excuse me, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say, this is Renee, that isn't the question here whether or not the customer is still expecting that feature to be delivered in the future. And then you would handle that one way, which is extending your, you know, the things we talked about before, where you're just going to extend the end date. So now you're showing a schedule variance. But it's a different answer if your customer said, I'm going to accept it now, but I don't ever expect you to finish that feature. And then that would be a scenario where you would do your de-scoping or something else, right? So are there two different answers maybe that we need to go down those paths on based upon what the customer, if he's still expecting that feature to be delivered in the next release or in a future release versus not?
Yes, which is exactly why we started having the two different after one and after two. Okay. So with no future delivery needed. So, you know, like we said, you know, must understand the root cause for the changes is the first thing. So let's go ahead and talk about the easier one, I think, first. Is after one. So what do you think? Does that just end up being a cost variance, an underrun maybe, if we're assuming the actuals were less?
I would have thought that if you didn't complete the feature that was originally there, it's a scope change. So that you would de-scope the portion that wasn't done because it's no longer required.
Well, so the feature itself is the scope. So if the customer accepts as is with nothing to be done, what is there to de-scope?
Well, you're taking the capability out of the whole system, right? So that's a de-scope. I don't know what you do about the money you've paid them for partial delivery, and that's the end of it.
Andrew, you're saying basically you still delivered the feature, but they said it was good enough, basically. So from a feature scope perspective, it wasn't maybe detailed down to the 55 tasks I needed to do underneath it. Therefore, if they're accepting the feature as fully functional, even if it was different than your original plan, then yeah, I think that makes sense that you would just have your positive cost variance.
So then this would just become 100% complete. Those all features at 100% complete, full EV, and could be a cost underrun.
You get too many of these, and you've paid for a lot of nothing. I mean, this is tricky because however you account for it, are you ever going to get the thing that you wanted in the first place? And if you didn't want it in the first place, why did you ask for it? That's a slippery one, right?
Well, it really depends.
Oh, really?
You know, how were the exit criteria of the feature? Was it defined? Maybe it really was good enough. Maybe there was extra nice to haves in the acceptance criteria. You know, we don't know. must understand the root cause of the change, must understand if criteria of work package was met. But for me, that's what it comes down to, and it is the customer and the product owner. It is their role to deem, you know, that feature accepted or not.
I think in order to figure that out, we've got to go to the next step, which is, okay, suppose they don't. What do we do then? What does it look like then? If they say, you're not done yet, go back and you're 70% done or 30% done. And how do we know that the amount done was actually what we wanted and not the bells and whistles in the first place? I mean, so I guess let's take a look at that and see how that looks and then compare the two. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to. It's going to take you longer to finish this project than you originally thought, I suspect.
Yeah, it depends on if that feature's on the critical path or not, and what the follow-on work looks like. And then I think then.
Do we have a critical path in this scenario? This is not CPM scheduling.
So correct. It's
so that. I don't know that we don't have. You know, I don't think we got a critical path defined.
Well, we just don't know and expect work. I think these are really the three options that we are talking about. Okay, so let's tease this one out. So, and expect work to be completed in the next release. I would almost just extend from a forecast perspective. What do you think about that? Is it that simple in this case? Well, it's a partial feature, so EV is going to be low.
Yeah. And the next release, which was already pretty tough, probably, or you wouldn't have hired these guys. It was already pretty tough. It now is twice as tough because you still have stuff. You know, we still have people working on the last segment's work. I mean, I remember one, and it was a commercial example of a software development where they said, "By God, we are holding to our milestones," and they absolutely were. Those milestones were just never changed, but they didn't produce anything, or they produced very little, and so the features kept getting forwarded to the next milestone and forward to the next milestone. Pretty soon they had 2 or 3 times the number of features they could possibly do in the next milestone. They were just never going to make it. And that was that. I mean, we don't want to have an answer which would permit that, I don't think.
Correct.
Which doesn't admit that they've got to double their staff or something to meet the next milestone.
And so what I'm documenting here is that, you know, we will have a negative schedule variance, period.
Yeah.
And then you have to assess the capacity for the future releases and look for the impact to the program finish date. So I think that's part of the analysis that needs to be done, and this is a potential option that could happen based on what piece of it the customer does or does not accept. And you're right. If you've planned your program, if you're new to Agile planning and plan it that there's zero extra capacity in the future releases, you know, you're right. You are sitting on a forecast, a program, you know, period of performance extension.
Yeah.
Unless you can hire another team that could parallelize the work if there weren't dependencies across the features.
Yeah, and yet these guys were just going up to management and claiming they hit all their milestones. And apparently management didn't understand that the milestones were empty of deliverables. And at some point that was going to catch up with them.
Correct. So for now, I'm just going to put a note about impacting the bow wave, add another team, extend overall schedule. So, yeah, and this is what I think people are looking for us to document. You know, what do they have to do holistically when they're in this situation, and what are the variations of this situation?
Hey, Andrea, at one
Yeah.
time we also talked about a scenario like this where it was delayed, the rest of the feature was delayed, but not necessarily into the next release. It might be like in this case, release 7 or 8. Is that something worth discussing how you might want to handle that?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to recommend we start talking about number 4 first. And this is going to be I better save, and this is going to be a tricky, a very tricky conversation. Let's just put it out here. So this is the other, 70%. Okay, so this is going to be really tricky. So if this original feature was 50K and we completed 30% of that, if depending on our EVT, maybe we've earned 15K of the 50K budget. If we are realizing this at this point of time now, that 35K of budget is trapped, right? Because it's time now. So what do you guys think? And I should, this is definitely going to take a lot more writing. So I believe our options are S equal P, S equal P, S equal P equal A. Or is it unplanned in scope? How would we handle this?
David Hewlett. Hello, who is this? No.
Okay, so what do the rest of you think?
So are the two options to this related to, one is just you are holding your work package open for the 6-9 months or whatever and showing your schedule variance, whereas the other option would be you're de-scoping the remaining work and putting it out in a planning package in the future to be reevaluated. So that you're not reporting on it for 6 months.
Those are the options.
And are both of them valid, such that they are both options?
I mean, I think they are valid. You know, what does your system description say? You know, is the difference between the after position 2, finishing it right away, and the after position 4? Does this after position 4 become so unrealistic? Right? Is that 6-month gap so unrealistic where you would want to request an S equal P or an S equal P equal A? Yeah, I don't know. Have all your all programs tracking actuals at that feature level? So that I think there are a lot of questions there to go into.
I think it depends upon how important that feature is to the overall success of the program, doesn't it? I mean, if it's really essential, you might want to stop everything until they get that feature done and just say we didn't meet the milestone. That's not part of your assumptions, but I think that should be recognized as a possibility.
And in our assessment to request an S equal P equal A, you know, how does that weigh in for you guys with your system descriptions on how important something is? Yeah, or maybe the answer is that in this case, the after 4 is, you know, we do go ahead and advise. See if I can get this same color. We do advise that the schedule variance does stay open for that many months. And then if that is happening in more and more cases, you know, again, this is just one example. What if across your program, they're seeing this happen on multiple features? And
Yep.
That's when you would turn to an S equal P equal or S equal P.
That's when we would turn to a new manager or a new supplier entirely. I mean, these guys have demonstrated they can't do something that they should have done, and they'll have excuses like, "Oh well, we thought this other thing was more important," or whatever. But pretty soon, if this happens multiple times, and I think that's one of the things that you ought to consider, if it happens multiple times and you get scope pushed out in the future, what do you have? Do you have a system at the end of the day? What do you recommend to the boss about this particular overall endeavor?
Yeah, and remember, you know, this is a joint effort with the contractor and the product owner. So there could be other directed change coming from the product owner where this might make sense.
Could be. Yeah. Oh yeah, that depends upon the reason why they didn't complete the scope. Yes, I understand that. But the reason may be we don't know how to do it, or we don't have enough people to do it, or the scope was too vague, and who knows. But if it was important enough, it should not be vague, and they should have just have completed it, and they didn't. So there ought to be some consequence, it seems to me, and it ought to go up the ladder.
Do you guys believe that single point adjustments are still bad? Does anyone have any thoughts or feelings?
I think that, well, it all depends on the intent of the single point adjustment. Why are you doing it, right? So, and I'm talking just in general with how we view them with EVM when we're looking at it from the oversight perspective. We really investigate what is the rationale, because we've seen where companies are just trying to hide bad performance. So there really has to be enough backing of why are you doing it? And are you trying to hide variances?
Mm-hmm.
So it's intent. In other words, it's the intent of the single point adjustment. That's just what we have to, how we have to look at it from an oversight perspective. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yes, that does. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I'd really like to see, and you know, I'm with you, David. When I start seeing stuff move to the right all the time, and they're not pulling anything back to the left, you know, that is the bow wave. And I'm actually grateful that we can see it because of our Agile implementation. You know, years ago, how many times did we couldn't even see the bow wave because we weren't breaking things out by feature. You know, it was just one big, grouping of scope, and you really couldn't see it. So
Yep.
I really like the fact that we can see this now in the schedule. Okay, so now this one. Let's say that the work is de-scoped. I think if the work is truly de-scoped, we are sitting on a single point adjustment.
I agree with that. If it's actually been de-scoped, that's legit.
Value, yeah, of the scope to be. And I'm hesitating because is it being de-scoped off the contract? Is it being de-scoped off that particular feature because they're going to accomplish the scope a different way? Like, how many ways do we want to take? Do we want to apply that word de-scope? And I guess no matter what the answer is, scope and budget returned to UB for analysis of all features to determine if scope is removed from program for just that feature to be accomplished a different way. What do you guys think about those words?
Those are good words, but at the end of the day, you're still de-scoping. So Even if it's to be done another, if the scope is removed, scope is removed. Right?
Correct. And it's returned to UB.
Yep.
And it remains as scope and budget in UB.
Yes. Absolutely.
And then the next question is the customer taking that money back and reducing the contract value? Or does the customer, do we then redistribute that scope and budget to a different place to accomplish the scope a different way?
Right. So that's when it gets moved to DB, depending on what that decision is.
Correct. And does that make sense to you guys? Or are you more of the school of thought that it must be removed from the contract?
I don't see the point of that if you can have that mechanics of this is just my perspective on this. If you've got the mechanics to move it from UB over and decide, and depending on your decision, DB determines where it goes and you track that, then I don't understand if you're going to, why would you remove it from the contract?
I agree 100% with you, Wendy. Yeah, and it's that coordinated discussion with the product owner, with the PMs, with, government and, if the government product owner is not the government PM, and contracts to determine. And I think it is okay to move that scope and budget to a different feature, to whatever else, however else you're going to accomplish that work.
100%. My opinion.
Do we think anyone, any other like EVM focal points, any EVM audit entities, do you think they'd have a problem with that?
I think just from what I observe, you have to just track it and show the mechanism and follow the rules of EVM. In other words, those are the mechanisms that we use. Whether it's using Agile or anything else, it shouldn't matter. You're using the mechanisms that are dictated by the rules of EVM. And at the end of the day, that's what you look at. Are those being followed? The mechanics, how you do that. I find that most people get into trouble when they don't follow the mechanics, regardless of methodology. And of course, you have to have evidence of the mechanics, always.
Can you see those words? Is that big enough?
It on my screen. I have a big screen now.
Cool. So we're going to put out there that it's okay, to do a single point adjustment, move that scope and budget. We've identified it. We have the evidence, and we can show it moving together. In our Agile tool, our work authorization, our baseline change request, that's our evidence. And we are showing that the scope and budget are moving together. And then again, it goes back to monitoring that bow wave with the product owner.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
Cool. I think some people might freak out a little bit if we're okay with single point adjustments, but you know, yeah, I don't necessarily think they're bad.
No, they have a tool, so you just have to use it correctly.
Right.
So, I think people freak out though because so many people have used them incorrectly. So they have such, you know what I'm saying, it's kind of a stress disorder about it. No, don't do that. That's what I think. The tool, use it correctly. Because why would they exist, right?
Right.
I mean,
And then do we want to note in these that you know, MR is not a request, is not a potential option, correct? You know, there's no way any of this could be determined as some sort of rework, you know, unplanned in scope work.
no, that's your unknown unknowns. No, that's not even. I agree. That can't use that one. Don't think it falls under that.
I just don't want everybody to be able to say, hey, we've made all our milestones. Every milestone is on exactly the date that we planned, but it's empty of substance, empty of deliverables, and empty of content. But they didn't say that. They just said, hey, we made our I mean, that's bad management. And we don't want to have anything that could be so untransparent that it could be covered up like that.
Correct. And I don't think any of these would have that happen.
Good.
Any other, I mean, you, Renee, and David, you guys really came up with, you know, lots of different versions of it. And no, and I mean that sincerely, that's good. Like, you know, because that's what people are going to do. They're going to say that the guide is at too high of a level. It doesn't show me how. There are different versions of this. And I'm just going to jump back over to the guide for a second here. So, and again, the big picture is, you know, our guide is already 80 pages. It's getting a little bit long. You know, we understand the folks who authored this guide, like we understand these are high level, you know, high level guidance, and we understand there are more nuances. We do not want this change table to end up being, you know, 3 or 4, well, it's already 2 almost. We don't want this to end up being 3, 4, and 5 pages within the guide. So we're trying to document some lower level discussion points, you know, in alternate white papers, things like that, to support the details below this summary level. And then I don't think I've captured yet the Agile impact. From an Agile perspective, you know, the reality is Agile doesn't really care about this. You know, it's just going to take, you know, well, if it's Steam closed, you know, features. So after 1, you know, any stories are closed, right? That's pretty simple. If you don't have to do the work, you know, I'm not a fan of deleting stories from the Agile tool. You know, you just close them as complete. All other, you know, reschedule stories to the appropriate sprint accounting for future sprint capacity and future downstream successor impacts. So any other Agile impacts?
Hey, Andrea, when you're talking about closing stories out in that, sorry, and I can't see exactly what you typed. So do we want to address like if those stories, like let's say there's stories out there, but we didn't do that work, we've kind of deemed that we don't no longer need to do that. Are we going to recommend that like those story points are removed from that? Because remember, we're trying to use those story points as the weighting for claiming EV too. So is there some guidance or some notes that we'd want to write on that at all or not?
So for me, this first one, you know, you get full credit. So there's no story points to remove.
So I would have thought that I would have still, let's say I have 10 stories out there, and just for simple math, I got 3 of those done. And now I'm saying that ultimately I'm done with that feature. It was good enough. I don't need to do those other stories. I think I would want to be removing those story points. So when I go back and look at actuals for the work that I completed, I want to know my real story points because I want to be knowing my hours per story point for forecasting and bidding and stuff like that. I wouldn't want story points for which I never actually executed effort for. That's my thought.
Got it. I'm going to say you could remove the story points from the Agile tool, you know, per corporate policy, and take 100%. Well, I'll leave that. So that's the EVM thing. So yes, Renee, if that works for you within your corporate policy, you know, I think that's just fine.
So when you say corporate policy, are you thinking system description or something else?
No, the Agile policy. Like
So
if your Agile implementation requires that you remove the story points, then you do it. But from an EVM perspective, you leave your QBD alone and the work package is just 100% complete. My guess is every Agile implementation is different. You know, some may want to hold on to the fact that they originally assumed it would be X number of story points. You know, we didn't have to work them. So maybe you just make a note that no effort, you know, was put towards those estimated story points. I think we're going to find the Agile corporate policy is different across all the Agile implementations. So any other thoughts, any other variations that we want to capture here? So it sounds like we're good on this one, and you know this one is a doozy. Let's just jump back over. So now we've addressed 1, 2, and 3.
Andrea, this is David. I've got another call coming pretty soon, so I've got to drop off. But thank you very much for inviting me. See you.
Yeah, you are welcome. And yeah, we don't really have enough time to start, the next scenario. So I will send out this updated spreadsheet to all again and ask if there's any other scenarios we want to talk through. If not, we'll just move forward with the April meeting, on to another topic, and we'll get that topic out before the April meeting occurs. So what do you guys think? Have we spent enough time on this? Or do we want to have another session teasing out additional change scenarios and diving into the details?
I'm just a fly on the wall. I don't even do Agile.
Right.
But I like learning. In other words, I'm good with whatever you do. No, it's been interesting. I like whatever the group finds, people that are coming to these find useful is good for me. I like listening to it and people's perspectives. So whatever you think is best.
Cool. So what I think I may do then is put down this topic, get this updated spreadsheet out. We actually are going to work a white paper, and I've been gathering this detailed data. So maybe we'll revisit this once we collaborate with ADAPT and with SE on what that white paper is going to look like. And then I think we'll naturally have an opportunity to revisit this.
Awesome.
So I'm going to say that our, change discussion is closed. 2 great sessions in 2023, and in April we'll move on to another topic.
That sounds good too.
So keep in touch, please. If you think of anything, have any requests, let us know. And we'll just keep moving forward with these collaborations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you doing this too. This is very good learning for me.